Well, good day, everybody. Welcome to Faith Seeking Understanding. I am Alan Bevere, your host, and I'm about to sneeze. I'll try not to do that, Michael. Anyway, yeah, that's
It
a
is
great
the
way to start
season.
the show.
Yeah.
Yeah. Anyway, this is Faith Seeking Understanding, and this is an episode of Calmly Considered. We try to do this once a month, but we kind of took a little longer break this time, and
Yeah.
that's on me. But
Life
anyway,
happens.
and of course, my conversation partner is Michael Cruz. How are you
I am doing
doing?
great. How are you, Alan?
I'm doing well. Boy, we've had a lot of rain over here where I am in Ohio.
Yeah.
Wow.
We've we've had some, but I've just been amazed all spring long how cool the temperatures have been. We've had a handful of hot days, but
Yeah.
I'm still wearing long sleeve shirts some days here late in May. So
Well,
it's
that's interesting because we've
yeah.
had, I would say, by and large, we've had warmer weather than usual here.
Oh,
So,
really? Wow. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. But anyway, yeah. So, real quick on the baseball front, my Guardians are doing all right. I'm
Yeah, they are.
kind of happy with what I'm seeing.
They
Yeah,
found their groove.
they have, and
Yeah.
so
And
uh,
and we don't need to talk about the Royals.
okay,
So
we don't have to do that. I was going to broach the subject, but I thought I'm going to let silence determine what you want to do.
hopefully hopefully their fortunes will change. It's not good this year. It's very, very disappointing.
Yeah,
Lots of
yeah,
expectations and
yeah.
well under and underperforming. So yeah.
Well, as a Cleveland sports fan, I am so well versed in disappointment. So I
Yeah.
understand. I understand what you're saying.
Right. Yeah.
Anyway, all right. So today's subject on Calmly Considered is which political party is worse for the economy? I got the idea for this show because you keep seeing memes on social media, right? They'll
Right.
tell you who's worse on the deficit, and they got these charts or they've got these lists. And of course, I'm always skeptical when I
Mhm.
see these things. So I thought, well, let's drill down a little bit. So I want to begin by saying that my sense of things over the years in just talking with people, the average American is not well versed on the complexities of the economy, right? That's
Right.
not an insult. People have things to do, they have lives to live, they've got other things that are important to them. So, sitting down and reading economic theory is probably not at the
Yes.
top of their list,
No.
except for wonks like you, Michael. It's not at the top of their list, so it's okay.
No.
Nothing wrong with that. I mean, we know a little bit about supply and demand and all that kind of thing. But my take has been in having conversations over the years is that we have certain convictions about what's good for the economy and what's bad. Whether that's true or not, we believe that.
Mhm.
And because economies, in a good economy, there's always bad stuff. In a bad economy, there's always good stuff. So
Right.
because you can always point out the good or the bad, I always cherry pick. I've got my own convictions, and so I always cherry pick what's going on in the economy that makes my party look good and makes
Mhm.
your party look bad, right?
Right.
So
Right.
you can have a roaring economy with the other party in power, and someone will say, "Gosh, the unemployment rate is really low." And then I say, "Well, yeah, but,"
Yeah.
right?
Right. Yeah.
And so this
Right.
is what we do. So
Right.
so we set up a situation where no matter what's going on in the economy, my side's always got it right.
Right.
That is not a good way to do economics.
Right. Yeah.
So let's talk a little bit about, and I've got some numbers here or some studies that have been done that I'm going to throw at you for your
Okay.
thoughts. But first, let's talk about that. Talk to me about the complexity of the economy and how it's really not a good practice to point to simple things and say, see, that's Biden's fault, or see, that's Obama's fault, or that's Bush's fault, right?
Right.
Let's talk to me about that a little bit.
Yeah. I think it was Harry Truman who famously said something about, Lord, please just give me a one-armed economist. And his point was is because every time you'd ask an economist a question, he'd tell you one answer, and then he'd say, "But on the other hand," and so there was always trade-offs. And I think what most economists will tell you is that any decision you make has trade-offs, and whether those trade-offs are good or bad, which balance between the trade-offs is good or bad, is a more subjective question in terms of what you think is good or bad. And so a lot of what you look at in economics, there isn't a clear this is right and this is wrong. First of all, the data, we're often using data as proxy for real world events, and that data is never perfect. And then you have economists who, let's give, you know, I don't want to say some grace to say that you have two economists that are debating, and they're debating in good faith, can rationally disagree about what the impact of these things are going to be because the information is imprecise.
Right.
So it's complicated. It is complicated to figure out, but that's not what works in politics. What
Right.
works in politics is that there is a singular answer that solves the problem. And by electing me and instituting my singular answer, that's what's going to fix the problem,
Yeah.
however you define what the problem is. And so there is a natural tension between doing what's economically wise versus what is politically successful, and that
Yeah.
balance of things. And so my perception is that over time, what tends to happen is you have one political party who, and they may be raising legitimate concerns, issues, who will implement their policy. That policy will always have trade-offs, and for a portion of the population, those trade-offs are going to be negative, which then gives the other political party the opportunity. Well, see, now if you just institute my plan over here, and then you have this oscillation back and forth. And to be honest, in the human condition, that may be the best you can hope for,
Yeah.
um, because we are never going to have a population where the majority of the population sits down and rationally thinks through how economies work and what's the best solution, and so on. It's always a muddled, tangled mess in terms of
Yeah.
talking about what happens with economies. I, so I'll just back up and say one thing personally, and over my years of looking at things, we tend to start with what are the problems and who's right and who's wrong. And I think one of the questions would be that I would begin with is um, what what is your picture of what's right? What is it that you would like to see? What's the world look like that we'd like to see? And I think that when you're talking about the economy, one that is productive, where people's have the vast majority of people have the ability to take care of themselves through their economic participation in the economy. The economy is growing, but it is not destroying the environment in which the economy exists. Um,
Yeah.
those to me often seem to be strong things. And so when we get to the American debate, I think one of the challenges that we have, and every society has divisions that are difficult to reconcile. But let me just back up and say that in Scandinavia, for instance, you have two things. You have um, you have high taxes, and you have low uh, entries to business and free markets.
Yeah.
Okay, and a robust welfare system.
Yeah.
So none of that comports well with what either party in the United States wants.
Right.
The so you get that's what has traditionally been the problem. And I think from my standpoint, this is just me speaking personally, the idea of a relatively free market economy where trade is the price mechanism of people competing in the marketplace should be the primary default way that we think about most transactions that happen in society. But that's coupled with taxation and a robust welfare system that gives people stability, that gives them health so that they can be productive members of the economy.
Right.
And that's largely how Scandinavia conceives of things, and they tend to consistently have the highest levels of productivity, of well being, health, all these things. Um, so something along that lines is when I think of what is it that we want to achieve. We want something. We want healthy, productive, satisfied people in a sustainable economy, and I think that that's what we're looking for. That's my perception. How you get there and what the problems are that we need to be solved, uh, that's where we get into the challenge. And it's a again, it is a on the one hand this versus the other hand that, which means that there's trade-offs, and political parties don't deal in trade-offs. Political parties deal in right and wrong, and here's my agenda, and we're going to do this.
Yeah.
So yeah,
Yeah, and I remember, as you say that, I remember way back when George H.W. Bush and Michael Dukakis were uh, pitting against each other in the campaign for president. Both men, very smart guys.
yeah,
And but they had this debate over burning the flag, and of course H.W. was pounding the patriotic drum about burning the flag, and Michael Dukakis kept trying to give constitutional arguments for why he disagreed with
yeah,
prosecuting people who burned the flag. And I remember
yeah,
watching the debate one night, and Carol and I are sitting there. So HW gets on this, and pumps the patriotic heart,
yeah,
and Dukakis then starts responding about constitutionally why he disagrees with that. And I
yeah.
looked at Carol and I said, "And right now, all of America is yawning."
Yeah, that's right.
Right. I
Yep.
mean, it's kind of difficult to I don't know what it is. Again, I don't want to imply people are not smart, but we don't have patience for
Right.
the complexity.
Right.
And evolutionary biologists say that it's sort of built into our DNA, but we want that quick fix, quick answer. And so let's get into the subject at hand.
Alan, can I
Go
just
ahead.
say
Go ahead.
something there too? Just piggybacking on that. It's not that humanity is dumb.
Yeah.
That's not the issue.
Yeah.
The issue to me is that each of us only has a limited capacity and how much we can comprehend about every aspect of life,
True.
economy, physics, medicine. I mean, you can't be an expert in everything. That's it's simply impossible. So what we often look for are shortcuts.
Yeah.
We look for things for we look for people that seem trustworthy to us, that do know about this stuff, and we look to them to give us guidance on those things.
Yeah.
We look for proxies. We see somebody talking about something that we do know about. They seem to be solid on that, and so then we tend to be tribute more authority and trust to them when they're talking about some other issue, right or wrong. We tend to do that. We look for shortcuts because there's no way that we can know
Yeah.
everything about everything.
That's
So
right.
that's not a matter of
That's right.
being immoral or stupid, or that's just human
Yeah.
existence.
Yeah.
So I'm not too quick to just say people are stupid, but we often have so many bad actors in the sphere of conversation that's going on. You're trying to distort the conversation away
Yeah.
from uh, wise thinking towards political power. That's
Yeah, and
usually
I think what bothers me currently in our culture, and it's always been this way, but that the problem is not that we want to defer to the experts, is that we spend too much time listening to people who aren't,
yes,
who
right,
come off that way, right?
right,
And that's the dilemma. And
yeah,
that's another subject for another time. So, speaking
right,
of shortcuts, I
yeah.
consulted artificial intelligence this
There you
morning
go.
because I didn't have time to go through all of this.
You're right.
So I asked the question about which political party is worse for the economy in the last 60 years, and I asked for an aggregate of studies. So
Yeah, yeah,
hopefully
right,
I got the aggregate of studies here. So here's
right,
what I get. Um, and so real GDP, I'm just going to read down this. You can respond late a little
yeah,
bit. Real GDP growth has been higher on average under Democratic presidents. Job growth and unemployment changes also tend to be more favorable under Democratic administrations. Inflation performance is mixed, but often slightly better under Democrats in some
yeah,
periods. Of course, it goes on to say that this is not a simple party causes economy story.
Right.
because there's all kinds of things, as you've already talked about, there's all kinds of things that happen that presidents, that parties have nothing to do with. And then you get the unexpected stuff, COVID, for example, um, or the financial crisis of 2008, which you could argue was caused in part by politicians.
Right. Sure. Right. Yeah. Right.
Um, the bottom line, it says, is there's no consensus that either party is worse for the overall economy, but multiple peer-reviewed studies find that the U.S. macroeconomic performance,
Right.
which includes GDP growth, job creation, and employment trends, has been stronger on average under Democratic presidents since World War II.
Right.
Again, and then there's all the cautions about what, you
Yeah.
know. So, all right, what do you say to that?
I think that's my understanding as well too. Um, I think over a lengthy period like that, if it were random, so to speak, you'd see about a 50-50 breakdown between there'd be virtually no difference between Democrats and Republicans because it'd be out of their control. So yeah, it tilts slightly in favor of the Democrats, but it's not radically in favor of the Democrats. I think in terms of what the performance looks like, which says there may be some help at the margins in terms of what individual political party is doing. But I'm not sure. It certainly is counter to me to the notion that basically whatever political party is in power is the one, quote, running the economy. Um, they aren't
Yes.
running the economy. The economy is doing what it does, and then they are nudging and tinkering at it at the edges, trying to move it in different directions. And sometimes things happen that are done politically that can have significant impacts for what happens with the economy, and then the economy rebalances and adjusts and moves on. So, yeah, I agree with that. What you just
Yeah.
read there, I think that's right.
And
Yeah,
and then the other thing is, again, we talk about inheriting economies. I was a while ago reading Andrew Jackson back in the 1820s. He had his two terms, popular president.
right.
The only time during any presidency when there was no deficit.
Yeah,
Andrew Andrew Jackson was a terribly racist person. I got to say that,
sure.
but during his two terms, the economy was pretty good.
Right,
But right near the end of his second term, there were signs were showing.
right,
A part of it has to do with his actions on the central bank and other things. The signs of a recession were showing.
right,
So he leaves office. Martin Van Buren comes in, and the recession hits, and who gets the blame?
right.
Right,
Yeah,
Martin
exactly.
Van Buren, and he's a
Right. Yeah.
one-term president because of this.
Right.
So again, economies, economies don't just start and stop with the change of presidential administrations,
Right. Right.
right? So you do inherit some things. Doesn't mean that the current occupants, and this also includes Congress, can do some things that hurt.
Right.
But the reality is that, no political party comes into office with a clean slate,
Exactly.
with an economy, just waiting to start up when they get in, right?
Right. Exactly. Well, and so there, I think of a couple examples, things like with the tax cuts that the Republicans are always so big on. So you do a bit. So the question is are these tax cuts that Republicans often promote with each administration that's come in, are they productive for the economy or are they damaging to the economy? Well, out the gate, within those first year or two, they often seem to boost the economy a little bit.
Yeah.
GDP can be boosted a little bit. I've read tax analysis, tax foundation, various groups that analyze these things. So yeah, it could boost it maybe 0.5%, 0.7%, something like that. But then after that, it becomes a drag on the economy because you've had to issue debt in order to cover the deficit that between the spending and the income that's coming in. And those tax cuts do not go one for one in terms of increasing the amount of spending that people do and the income that they get on which they pay taxes. So the tax revenue never quite catches up with the tax cuts. So it creates a wider um, debt that interest has to be paid on, which then becomes a further drag on the economy. And we're getting deep into the weeds here. But my point being that, going to your point, so administration puts in tax cuts the second year in their administration, and for 2 or 3 years of that administration, yeah, maybe you see a little bit of an arc up, and then it begins to peter out because that's as long as they last. Now you're into the next administration,
Right.
and they've got that, and now the economy's struggling more, the deficit's starting to go up. They've got to take more severe action than they otherwise would have, and then they get blamed for the fact that the economy is going bad because they increased taxes.
Yeah.
Um, and the same can be true with the impact of social spending programs. You spend a lot of money to address a particular problem, and initially for the first 2 or 3 years, you may not see an impact, but over time, it can become a drag on the economy because government's spending too much or maybe spending unwisely. Um, so yeah, it's the you don't get immediate um, impact of
Yeah.
decisions many times when administrations make them, and so it becomes hard to evaluate um, because and it bleeds over from one administration to the next. Whose fault was which part of it? So
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah. So what we're saying here is we need to avoid this kind of the simplistic analysis that you can put in a little square box and post on social media, right?
yeah,
Right.
it's generally more complicated in
It's
most
generally
cases.
more complicated than that. And
Yeah,
uh, the one of the things I wonder about, I was thinking the other day, I think you and I have talked about this. I'm going to be having cataract surgery here
yeah.
this next month.
Okay, I know
Uh,
something soon. Okay,
elderly problems right now. I'm
yeah,
I'm to that age, but and I've got insurance, but I've got out of pocket expenses, right?
right,
And the out of pocket expenses are not cheap.
right.
And of course I can afford to pay it. But I was saying because you talked about was it Denmark you talked about or Sweden?
Yeah, Denmark or Scandinavian country. Yeah,
Scandinavia. My wife and I were talking about it, and I said, we Americans over the years have been so, I don't know what to say. We have been so brainwashed, just maybe a little tough,
yeah,
but we have been so schooled in taxophobia
right,
that Americans won't think twice about having to shell out several $1,000s in out of pocket expenses for health care.
right,
But if you try to put even half of that money into taxes, they scream bloody murder. So
right.
so it's like I don't want to pay more in taxes for health care. Well, you're already paying more.
Yeah, yeah,
You,
exactly.
you already are.
Yeah,
And then you're paying for the people who don't have insurance, who use the emergency room as their doctor's office and all kinds of things. Again, there's a lot going on here, but we have
right,
so been schooled into this idea that taxes is a four-letter word
right,
that we'll pay the same amount, if not more, as long as I can take it out of my pocket and not have the government take it out of my pocket.
right. Yeah, agreed. Yeah, I think part of uh, that we could get into so many different cultural differences between the United States and other countries, and
Yeah.
each other country has its own nuances. But I think one of the big things for the United States was always this idea of being able to go out the expansive new territories out to the West, and you could be the rugged individualist and have your own property and take care of yourself, or you and your community could take care of each other. And you didn't need big actors in the world to
Yeah.
interfere in your life and to do all these things that were intrusive. You had your independence, so that's buried deep in our psyche
Yeah.
as to what that's about. So there's a resistance to looking at government, whereas in other societies, government frequently is looked at as more as a partner rather than an
Yeah.
adversary.
Yeah.
And I think part of the whole thing about government seen as an adversary goes back to our whole colonial development with Britain in the colonial days, and has carried forward ever since.
Yeah.
We talk about the whole balancing what you talk balance of power between the three branches of government and putting guardrails on. All of that came from our colonial days of being suspicious of centralized power, but
Right.
not wanting to be too decentralized because we can't let
Right.
the riffraff run everything either.
Right.
Um, so it's that dichotomy has always been there, and I think that that's where a lot of our resistance to taxes come from versus many other places in the world. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So what do you think? What would I mean? Where do you fault both parties in reference to economic policy? Where would you, if Michael Cruz was running the show and could do what he wants, um, what would you change about the different parties as far as what they've been promoting as far as economic policy?
Okay. Two things, and there are multiples with each party, but I'd say two things that I would suggest is that with the Republican Party, the idea of tax cuts without reduced government spending is suicidal.
Yeah.
That's just not going to work. And their tendency is to say, yeah, we're going to do these tax cuts, but we're going to jack up military spending by hundreds of billions of dollars, and then we're going to go off and do this foreign war over here and spend trillions over there. And so they said they don't want government. That yeah, they do want government. They just want it in the military, and they want it in these other aspects that are not beneficial to most of society.
Right.
So
Well,
if you're
and if I
going to,
can interrupt real quick before I
yeah,
lose my thought here, is that they do say they're going to cut, but then they cut like USA Aid,
yeah, right,
which of course is life-saving stuff now gone, but it's like even less than 1% of the budget. So
right,
they make these cuts. We're making cuts to pay for the,
right,
but they don't remotely cover the tax cuts. And then they
right,
go and spend more money in these on these big ticket items that you're talking about.
right. Or cut. We're going to cut money to the national parks. National parks bring in more money than we spend on them.
Yeah.
They're a net revenue generator for
Yeah.
us. But, oh, we don't like national park. That's part of what those liberal tree hugging people want to do. So we're going to cut. Yeah, um,
Yeah.
that
Liberal tree
kind of
huggers like Teddy Roosevelt.
yeah, exactly. Right. Yeah. So you get some of that kind of mentality going
Yeah.
on. So the question is yeah, you have to be strategic about what you're going to cut. Um, if you're going to do that, the Democrats, on the other hand, are saying to raise taxes, and I think that's probably right. I think taxes probably are too low. Taxes need to go to be higher to cover the things that we probably do need. One of my biggest criticisms of the Democrats, and I'll give you a specific example. I think it's the guy's escaping me right now. I want to say Ezra Klein, but that somehow doesn't sound like the right name. Anyway, reading in a book that he wrote, he was saying that there was a case where they were trying to do a rollout of rural internet and telephone access
Yeah.
and they had there's like 54 different zones in the United States for doing this, and this was part of Biden's infrastructure bill back in 2022, I think it was, or something like that. They layered in so many hoops that you had to jump through to get to the point where you actually got the funds that I think only three or four of the 54 regions in the United States actually completed the process and got through where they're getting this money. And that was after multiple years of trying to work the process.
Yeah.
Um, a lot of democratic thinking tends to be about trying to control matters up front to create so many regulations, so many hoops, so many environmental analysis and all these kind of things. I'm not saying there isn't a role for any of that, but you create so many layers that you never actually get the impact of the program in any way that the public can see, oh, you did that action and this occurred. It's if anything happens, it's years down the road apart from when the decision was made. So the public never makes the connection between what happened. Instead, I think what would work better in a lot of cases is to make a decision and say, here's how we're going to distribute the money. And you make it clear that there will be accountability if you abuse this money and spend it in ways that's inappropriate. You'll be held accountable in court. You do, and then
Right.
the businesses or the local governments have the freedom to figure out how to implement a lot of these things
Yeah.
rather than trying to centralize control everything from the top in terms
Yeah.
of the programs that they promote. Um, so yeah, there are challenges on all sides, and I think um, the Democrats make me a little cringy sometimes, talking about the evils of capitalism. And
Yeah.
capitalism is such a fluid, ill-defined word. The countries that are doing the best in terms of life expectancy, of satisfaction of life, the Scandinavian countries are some of the most free market countries in the world.
Yeah.
They're about trade. They're about low barriers to entry for businesses, about facilitating processes for business operating. They're about having skilled workforces. That's the heart of their robust welfare network. They are about free markets.
Yeah.
And so the constant attack on the idea that there's free markets. Now, where I would agree with them is that a lot of these billionaires are nothing about free markets. They're about monopolies. They're about trying to control systems,
Right.
and that
Right.
that part needs to be broken up. But that's not capitalism
Right.
necessarily. That's so the rhetoric.
And I think
Um,
Adam Smith would agree with you.
yeah, yes, exactly. He was very distrustful of
Yeah.
business people. Whenever they get together, the first thing they try to do is conspire to how to screw the customer.
Yeah. Yeah.
That was Adam Smith. Yeah.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Well, that's interesting that you say that because, and we did a show on this a while ago about capitalism versus socialism. That
Right.
there's so much, again, Joe Biden, we cannot reelect Joe Biden. He's going to bring us socialism. Joe Biden is
Right.
socialist, really, Michael.
Yeah. Yeah. Right.
Anybody who knows anything about capitalism or socialism knows that.
Yeah.
Even Bernie Sanders, who likes to brag he's a socialist, isn't a socialist,
Right.
right? When it comes to, and the other thing, let me say one other thing about this too. What real socialist societies are left, or communist societies? I mean,
Yeah.
China. They're not a free society. They don't have free elections, but boy, they've done a lot of market stuff
Yeah.
over the last 30
Market
years.
socialism is how some people.
Market socialism, maybe is always,
Yeah. Yeah.
I'm not necessarily endorsing that. I'm just saying
Yeah.
that
Right.
they have moved away from this idea of government nationalizing everything and owning everything, right? Am I correct on that?
Yeah, I think that's true, and I think one of the countries that's interesting to look at is Sweden, which I think it was back in the 1970s or so took a very much a socialist bent where they did.
Yeah.
And let me clarify. When I say socialist, I mean government intervention in the marketplace, government ownership of certain industries, that type of thing. That's what I
Right.
mean when I'm talking socialism. They took a about a 20-25 year venture into that, and their economy stagnated relative
Yeah.
to the other Scandinavian economies. Things were going downhill. And in the 1990s, they decided to reverse that and join the other Scandinavian countries in a more free market approach. And
Right.
immediately their economy began to boom. They still
Yeah.
kept that robust welfare system that was there. But so they ventured at the edges of socialism. I think it's also tricky too. The terms are so slippery. What's the difference between an authoritarian country and a socialist country,
Right.
and how do you want to define that?
Right.
Of course, there's never been neither a pure socialist country or a pure capitalist country anywhere in the world. That's never existed. So we're always talking about gradations and hues of,
Yeah.
things. But yeah, I think that most countries realize that they have to be involved in markets and exchange to some level. The idea of pure socialism as the be all end all model of what we want is not there. So,
Well,
and,
the
yeah,
free markets are the global economy.
yeah, yeah,
And why would anyone who's got a sense of what they need to do to have prosperity would bow out of that, right?
right, right,
Oh, okay. Well,
yeah,
we'll just keep going with it. I think the problem again is not capitalism. It's allowing the excesses and allowing, and
right,
again, you mentioned about the billionaires, that this really isn't capitalism, right?
right, right,
And we really are. We're kind of in a oligarchy in some sense.
Right.
I mean, the markets are free, but boy, um, right now, the wealthiest are well, let's just say they've got the ear of the government in a way that they've been enriched and enriching themselves.
Exactly. Yeah, and they use their wealth and their power to constrain markets from operating in ways that are detrimental to them.
Yeah,
They try to basically drive out any competition, and they use politicians that they get elected to gut any kind of accountability for the
yeah,
work that they're doing and making sure that they play by the rules of a quote capitalist society,
yeah.
and try to create an oligarchy instead of a free market economy. Yeah,
Yeah, my teacher Stanley Hauerwas one time called that socialism on stilts.
yeah, yeah. There you go. Yeah, right.
Uh, yeah, that's another subject for another time. But I think what we're concluding here is we just need to be careful about making a clear demarcation about which political party is better on the economy and knows what's going on.
Right, right,
And we just need to be careful about that. We won't be. We'll continue to post these memes and
right.
but at
I,
least in
I,
some corner of the world, we need to try to have some conversation about it.
Right. I do think that there are legitimate things that you can make about administration, pointing out specific issues. The increasing national debt is, I think, demonstrably a problem. We don't know where the where's the straw that breaks the camel's back in terms of issues with national debt. Lots of people speculate where we're already there. Some say, oh, it's a long ways off. Others, it could happen tomorrow. Um, so we don't know exactly where we're at, but I do think the idea that the national debt is a problem. How do you want to fix the national debt? That's where you get into the debate of politics. But we so the issues of the things that have happened with this administration, with tax cuts without any uh, real significant cuts in spending, engaging in a foreign war, and then the ludicrous thing of global tariffs on every country. I mean,
Yeah.
I think those three things combined, um, like I said, trade-offs and everything, but I think those three things combined spell to me some of the worst decisions a single president has made in recent
Yeah.
administration. Um,
Right. And Donald Trump doesn't fit the conservative bill, though. That's the thing.
no, he sure does not.
He's clearly an outlier. I mean,
Yeah,
you
yeah,
cannot put him in company with either Bush's or Ronald Reagan, right? I
right,
mean,
exactly,
he just he you know at least they tried to govern by what they thought were conservative principles. You
right,
know, Trump governs by what works for him,
right,
and so he just sort of is like in a category all by himself, right?
right, right.
Yeah. And
Yeah,
and he's really, the deficit has really increased since he's been in office the second
yes,
time.
right.
Yeah.
We're up to about 40 trillion dollars
Yeah.
in and about 100%, well, 125% looking at the total national. Uh, let's back up. The debt to GDP ratio, my understanding is that I think it's about 125%
Yeah.
of debt to GDP ratio, and 100% if you're just looking at the consumer debt or
Yeah.
the yeah. So
And what really bothers me on this is the hypocrisy. So when Republicans are talking about deficit spending and fiscal responsibility, and whenever a Democrat then is in the White House, they start touting that. I want to say, physicians, heal yourselves.
yeah,
Get your house in order.
yeah,
We're not saying that Democrats don't spend. We're saying that, you know, when you have the keys, deficits go up.
right,
So don't be touting standing on that. When you guys can't seem to have your own house in order. I
right,
mean, I wonder where are all the, and maybe you've heard some, I mean, where are all the Republicans screaming at what's going on right now, right,
yeah,
with deficit spending?
yeah. I mean, there are a few that I know have been
Yeah,
were critical of the big, beautiful bill.
yeah,
think many of them caved and went for it anyway. But it's a very tiny minority that
Yeah.
is vocally opposing what's going on. Yeah, I it's the from a pure, what am I trying to say, objective standpoint, you could make the case that, yeah, it's probably good to have some tax cuts because that will stimulate growth and so on. And giving benefit of the doubt, that person is credibly making that argument because they genuinely feel that that's what they believe. I think the evidence continually points to that. So many people making that argument, it's a cynical argument to justify getting increases for the wealthiest,
Yeah.
cutting taxes for the wealthiest to increase their bottom lines and that type of thing. It has nothing to do with concern about the economy and helping the economy grow.
Yeah.
Um, so I think, and that's again my personal perspective
Well, and
on
at some
what
point
I think.
I was just thinking about this yesterday and thinking to myself, at what point do we call the mad pursuit of even more wealth than one person could ever possibly spend an addiction, right? I mean,
Yeah,
we talk about sex addiction and drug addiction, alcohol addiction. At what point do we talk about wealth addiction? That
yeah,
when if you've got $500 billion, if that's your worth,
yeah,
and you're still wanting to make more, right? At some
yeah.
what point do you say, uh, I got enough?
Right,
And that's the moral question.
right,
This is not numbers and policy, but it is a moral question. Is at what point do you say? And let's be clear, there are billionaires out there who are very generous, right?
right,
Um, and but at what point do we take the Bible's counsel
right,
seriously that the love of money is the root of all evil, right?
right, right.
That's another question for another time. But I think when it comes to wealth, we're kind of a sin sick society.
Yeah. Well, of course, there are always going to be those outliers at the very top. There always have been, always will be, who are about power
Yeah,
at the expense of all else. It's an obsession, and part of the uh, a healthy, functioning society is that it has guardrails and curbs to put on those people.
right,
It's not that we're ever going to get rid of them and that we're ever going to have some moral transformation
right.
where
That's
we
right.
never have challenges from this again. The issue is that we have to have a society that puts curbs on that
Right.
kind of
And
friction.
if I could make an argument right now, I see that is the biggest problem. We don't have enough guardrails
Right,
right now. We don't have enough guardrails on the wealthy. We don't have enough guardrails on the current administration, although he's done his best to erode that.
right,
But we don't have a moral. I mean, we don't have a moral Republican Party to keep the guardrails. You don't have a Republican Congress who finally had enough with Richard Nixon, right, and said
right,
enough.
right,
We don't have that, and so we don't have the guardrails, and that's the problem. And we just need. We don't. You and I don't want excessive government control, so don't anybody hear that.
right.
We do think there's a place, though, for boundaries, and
Yes,
we
right,
need them. We need them.
right. Yes, we do. Yeah,
So.
exactly.
All right, my friend. Well, you got anything else good for the order here? So anyway, I just read yesterday. I can't think of his name. Says that the stock market crash is coming. Um,
Yeah, I don't know. I did read, who was this? A guy at S&P who's generally a nonpartisan, doesn't get involved in political statements, but
yeah,
he now puts his evaluation of a recession in the next 12 months at 50-50,
yeah,
which is a significant upgrade from like 10 or 15% he was saying like 3 months ago.
yeah,
So, and I think a big piece of that has been this stuff in Iran has significantly screwed things
yeah,
up. That the cascading impacts of that
yeah,
um, are going to be a problem.
yeah,
Yeah. So I guess my final closing statement would be is that I've tried to be careful about trying to specifically attribute uh, superiority to either party in terms of how they handle the economy. But I will say that as somebody who was a Republican leaning person through much of my life right now, that everything that I look at between the two parties, it's not even a hard question for me to debate in terms of who I would vote for in terms of economic
Yeah.
issues, and that would be the Democrats.
Yeah.
This is the what the Republicans to me are doing is irresponsible. It's ill-conceived, and uh, that's where I stand at this point. Talk to me 5 years from now, maybe
Yeah.
after the Democrats have gotten charge, and we'll see what policies they implement, and then we'll talk then. And
Yeah.
that's why I guess that comes back to the other thing is rooting our identities in a political party
Yeah.
always leads to folly. Um, we have to try to maintain some objectiveness and recognize that we have proclivities towards political influence, one direction or the other, and that's fine.
Yeah.
But to have your whole identity wrapped up in a political party where you can never um, uh, evaluate and say, okay, things have changed, I need to make different decisions, then you're not being a faithful citizen to the United States or your own country or
Yeah.
wherever you are. Yeah.
Yeah. I've known some people who I've said over the years would cut off their right arm before vote for somebody on the other party.
Yeah. Right.
Right.
Yeah. Right.
And I'm like you. I mean, I've been an independent voter
Yeah.
most of my adult life, but I voted for Republicans probably 60, maybe close to 70% of the time.
Yeah. Yeah.
And there's no way I would do that right now.
Nope. Right.
There's just no way because first of all, there's just no moral compass anymore in
Right.
the Republican Party. But 5 years from now, it could be different. If the Democrats are running the show, you know what happens when people get power? They go goofy.
Yeah. That's
So,
right.
5, 6, 7 years from now, we could be looking at a Democratic majority in the House and in the White House and watching them do stupid stuff too. It's just
Yeah.
amazing what power does and influence. So,
Right. Exactly.
yeah. So, oh well, Michael, you and I have done well handling the influence that we have in our very small circles
Yes. Right.
of maybe 6 people.
After 60 years of wrestling with this stuff, I figure I'm batting around 250 maybe at managing the
That's
project.
respectable. That's a 250 is very respectable.
Respectable, but
So,
we're not getting in the Hall of Fame.
absolutely. Absolutely. Well, we're going to have to, on that very powerful, strong
Right.
note, we're going to have to end there. Friends, by the way, we're going to do an episode of this coming up here in the next couple, 3 weeks on the 250th anniversary of the United States of America and have some conversation about what that means and what maybe the future looks like. What are the issues? What are the things at hand? So we're going to do that. And we'll talk about that. So, anyway, but thank you for joining us on Faith Seeking Understanding. I am Allan Bevere, and always remember that the patron saint of Faith Seeking Understanding is Anselm of Canterbury, who said, I do not understand in order to believe, but I believe in order to understand. So, friends, keep seeking.